Welcome to the deep dive. Our mission today, well, is pretty straightforward. We're cutting through almost 150 years of history, really trying to get at the DNA of these colossal fortunes. We've got sources covering everyone from the Gilded Age robber barons through the 20th century financiers right up to today's tech titans. We're looking for the patterns, the ambition, the strategies, the compromises.
Yeah, and this isn't just about, listing who was rich when. This deep dive is really about dissecting capital itself and power, and maybe the ethical tightropes these people walked or sometimes just ignored.
Right.
We're looking past this, let's say, financial genius label to see the ruthless side, the strategic plays, and maybe the hidden costs of just being obsessed with winning, with dominating.
Okay, so let's start where it all kind of took shape, where that raw power of capital first got organized. I'm talking about the Gilded Age, the foundations.
Absolutely, because the fortunes built back then, they weren't just money, they were structural. These guys weren't just running businesses, they were taking control of the whole infrastructure. Railroads, steel, oil, building empires, really.
You said railroads. You have to start with Cornelius Vanderbilt, right? The Commodore. His thing was scale. He understood it in a way nobody else did. He grabbed the most vital transport links and just operated on a level that was completely unprecedented, made himself essential, basically.
And Vanderbilt really embodies that shift, doesn't he? From the sort of lone wolf competitor, almost pirate-like, as one source calls him, a Viking warrior, to the guy building this huge bureaucratic corporate machine. Before him, it was all partnerships, individuals. He helped create these massive interstate corporations that just dwarfed everything else. It's what historians call the managerial revolution, moving away from just owner-operators.
And the way he did it, the tools were just so blunt. Financial weapons, basically, and he wielded them personally, like when he was going after the New York Central Railroad. And rivals like Daniel Drew tried that lockup operation.
Right, the lockup, basically cornering the market to choke him out. But Vanderbilt saw that as, how did the source put it, a shotgun of a financial weapon, devastating, imprecise.
And likely to injure innocent bystanders.
Yeah, exactly. So he just threatened them back with his own massive capital. His reputation for actually using it was enough. He forced them to fold just by showing he was ready for total war.
What gets me is the personal risk he took, even while building these huge public companies. During that Central Railroad consolidation, the sources say he was personally propping it up, paying hundreds of thousands out of his own pocket to keep cash flowing, not just relying on corporate finance. It shows how thin that line was between the owner's wallet and the company's.
It's totally different from today, isn't it? With all the focus on agency risk and separating ownership from control, Vanderbilt was the control. But that kind of intense, centralized power, it made for a pretty volatile management style, especially with family.
Oh, that story about his son, William. Late in life, right? Vanderbilt's in his 80s. A reporter comes by, mentions he already talked to William.
Yeah, what happened?
The Commodore just flares up, gets angry and snaps, Billy, he always tells more than he knows. It perfectly captures him, doesn't it? Cool business focus, but zero patience for anyone not meeting his standard, even his own heir.
So if Vanderbilt was about brute force, expansion, physical infrastructure, then John D. Rockefeller was all about meticulous efficiency and cash, absolute power of cash in the oil game.
The stories about Rockefeller's thrift are almost legendary, but they're key to understanding him, aren't they?
Total.
Like seeing him at the refineries at 6:30 a.m., rolling barrels himself, no airs about him then. He wasn't just directing efficiency, he was living it.
And that thriftiness led straight to innovation, trying to cut costs everywhere, like the sulfuric acid residue most refiners just dumped.
Yeah.
Rockefeller hired chemists to figure out how to turn it into fertilizer, made it a profitable side business. He even hired his own plumber full-time and bought his own pipes because he hated paying standard contractor bills. Just relentless focus on eliminating waste.
And that meant what? Standard Oil never lost money.
Never. Not a single year of loss. Despite all the booms and busts in the oil industry back then, that relentless efficiency gave them a stability.
But it wasn't just pinching pennies, was it? It was about having cash on hand. Massive liquidity.
Oh, absolutely. That was his ultimate weapon. He tells this story about needing hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash, like actual banknotes, by 3 p.m. one day for a crucial deal.
Wow. How'd he do it?
He just drove from bank to bank, scooped up the cash, and made the deal happen on the 3 o'clock train. None of his competitors could match that kind of instant liquidity. He could just outbid anyone in a pinch because he had the ready money.
And to keep that edge, secrecy was everything.
Paramount. He built this culture of silence within Standard Oil, warned refiners joining the trust, don't parade their sudden wealth, keep the contract secret. He even told one guy to hide the deal details even from your wife. Information control was maybe his biggest asset, and he had this knack for turning enemies into assets. It's kind of terrifying, actually.
How so?
If you managed to beat Standard Oil in court or outsmart them in a negotiation, Rockefeller would often try to hire you. He recruited Roger Sherman, who'd argued brilliantly against Standard Oil, right onto his legal team.
No kidding.
Same with Virgil Klein, another lawyer who had given us a good licking, as Rockefeller put it. He respected the talent enough to buy it and aim it at his next opponent. Brilliant, but ruthless.
That ability to co-opt opposition, it brings us to Andrew Carnegie. Steel Empire, obviously, but his game involved really complex financial plays and a pretty stark approach to labor.
Carnegie's financial dealings could be really intricate, like that bond swap with the Allegheny Valley Railroad and the Pennsylvania Railroad.
Remind me about that one.
He arranged this complex swap of dollar bonds for gold bonds. Not really because the railroads needed it, but because he could make a huge commission selling the new gold bonds. He was always looking for that angle, that arbitrage between big players.
But then you have his social philosophy clashing with that. He got some really smart advice early on from Captain Jones in 1878. Jones told him not to cut wages.
Right. Jones said, low wages does not always imply cheap labor. He argued good wages and good workers were actually the cheapest labor in the long run. Keep morale up, keep loyalty, that saves money.
Which sounds reasonable.
Yeah, but Carnegie seemed to keep his theory and his practice pretty separate. In 1890, he's declaring, socialism is the grandest theory ever presented. Talking about a coming millennium, he's positioning himself as this great philanthropist, a social thinker.
But then Homestead happened, the Amalgamated Labor Union.
Exactly. Faced with a real challenge from organized labor, the theory went out the window. He laid out this battle plan straight out of Cardinal Richelieu. First, all means to conciliate. Failing that, all means to crush.
Wow. Conciliate or crush?
It's brutal. Military strategy applied to business. It just perfectly shows that split between the intellectual idealist and the utterly ruthless businessman protecting his interests.
Okay, so that's the Gilded Age foundation. Let's jump forward. How does this kind of financial warfare evolve into the modern era?
Well, the focus shifts, doesn't it? From controlling the physical stuff, steel, oil, railroads, to controlling the infrastructure of modern finance itself. We're talking data, leverage, speed.
And the players change. Not industrial titans so much as financial architects, private equity, the LBO, the leveraged buyout.
Right. Firms like Blackstone really perfected this model. They focus on companies going through what they call tricky transitions, things public markets hate.
Like what kind of transitions?
Like, say, a telecom company needing massive, expensive network upgrades. If they're public, the stock gets hammered because quarterly earnings dip during the investment phase.
Ah, okay, so Blackstone buys them, takes them private.
Exactly. Takes them private, shields them from that short-term market pressure. Management can then make those huge necessary investments over several years because the owners, Blackstone and their investors, are calling the shots and playing the long game.
And what's fueling these huge buyouts? It's mostly debt, right? Leverage?
Overwhelmingly leverage. And you see how quickly the risk escalated. In 2004, the average big buyout was priced around 7.4 times the company's cash flow.
Okay.
But 2007, just 3 years later, that jumped to 9.8 times cash flow.
Whoa, let's unpack that. 9.8 times cash flow. That means it would take almost 10 years of the company's entire earnings just to pay back the debt used to buy it.
Pretty much. And that huge increase in debt wasn't because the PE firms were putting in vastly more of their own money. It was mostly banks just offering bigger and bigger loans, hungry for the deal fees. They were trading risk for transactions.
So timing becomes crucial in that kind of high-stakes game.
Absolutely critical. The sources point out that the buyouts done right at the bottom of economic cycles like 1991, 2001, those generated average returns near 30%. That's double what deals done in other years made.
So the smart money buys when there's blood in the streets, basically, using massive debt capacity to exploit those downturns.
Precisely. It's classic. Now, moving from the buyouts to the actual trading floors, the modern gold rush is all about information, or maybe more accurately, unequal information. Who gets it first, and how fast can they act on it?
Which brings us to things like insider trading, but maybe more systematized, like at SEC Capital.
Yeah, SEC Capital is a prime example. It wasn't just about getting lucky tips. It was structural. They actively looked for traders with personal connections that might yield Well, non-public information.
Seriously, how did that work?
If a potential hire, say, rented a house in the Hamptons near some CEO, or had fraternity brothers on boards, or a father, that was actually seen as a plus.
Because those connections might be a source of intel.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It pointed, according to the sources, to a culture of securities fraud that lasted a decade. And the setup inside the firm seemed designed for it. The general counsel, the compliance folks, described as quiet, low energy, kind of sidelined.
While the recruiters and the president were...
Big and broad-shouldered types dominating the culture, prosecutors basically saw it as the boss bullying the legal and compliance side into looking the other way.
At the same time, you had high-frequency trading, HFT, completely changing the market structure.
Right. Suddenly the market wasn't just one place like the NYSE floor. It became this collection of small markets scattered across different data centers, mostly in New Jersey.
And the difference between those markets was measured in milliseconds.
Milliseconds. And that tiny time gap created an opportunity. Traders like Brad Katsuyama at RBC figured out they were being systematically front-run.
Okay, explain front-running in this HFT world. How did it actually work?
Okay, so imagine RBC wants to buy, say, 100,000 shares of Apple. They place the order. That order has to travel electronically to all these different little market centers.
Right.
But it arrives at slightly different times, nanoseconds apart. An HFT algorithm, sitting with a super fast connection, sees that buy order hit the first exchange. Instantly, it races ahead electronically and buys up Apple shares on the other exchanges, the ones the RBC order hasn't reached yet.
Before RBC's own order gets there.
Exactly. Then, milliseconds later, RBC's full order arrives, needing those shares. The HFT firm immediately sells the shares it just bought to RBC, but at a tiny fraction of a cent higher.
Wow. So they scalped tiny profits millions of times.
Millions of times a day. And it added up. Sources say it cost firms like RDC tens of millions of dollars in hidden costs and fees. It was a market distortion based purely on speed.
And the big banks themselves got drawn into this speed race, like with that new fiber optic line from Chicago to New Jersey.
Yes, spread networks. Ultra-fast, straight line. Banks scrambled to get access. But the contract had a catch.
What was it?
It barred them from sharing that super-fast line with their regular brokerage customers. Morgan Stanley apparently got nervous about how that looked.
The optics, right?
Yeah, they asked Spread to change the wording, basically wanting plausible deniability.
Yeah.
They wanted to use the speed for their own proprietary trading desks, but didn't want to look like they were deliberately disadvantaging their retail clients.
And Goldman Sachs.
Goldman, according to the source, had no problem signing it. They just saw speed as the new competitive necessity, and weren't going to let optics get in the way.
So you have this incredibly complex, leveraged, super fast system. What happens when it breaks? We saw that in 2008.
Oh, absolutely. The AIG near collapse showed just how tangled everything had become globally, far beyond anything Vanderbilt could have imagined. There was this list circulating showing AIG's biggest counterparties.
The firms that would go down if AIG failed.
Exactly. And it was a who's who of global finance: ABN, AMRO, Callion, Goldman, Morgan Stanley. The source called it huge systemic risk. One failure wasn't isolated anymore. It's contagious. The whole system was vulnerable.
And you saw that fear and lack of trust in Lehman's final hours, too. Bank of America considering buying them.
Right. Their lawyer was extremely wary. Told the Lehman CEO, basically, don't waste my time unless you personally call Ken Lewis at BOFA and say, I want this deal.
Demanding that direct CEO to CEO confirmation.
Yeah. It just showed how fragile confidence was, how volatile things were right before the crash. Everyone was second-guessing everyone else.
It's a fascinating contrast. The Gilded Age guys use ruthless methods to control physical stuff. Modern finance uses ruthless methods to control information, speed, leverage. But the scale means one mistake can rock the entire global economy.
A scale Rockefeller or Carnegie, for all their power, could never have reached.
Okay, let's broaden the lens beyond just Western finance. How does extreme wealth get built elsewhere, especially where politics plays a more overt role? You mentioned Asian godfathers in the sources.
Right. The rise of some major tycoons in Asia often comes from exploiting, well, structural issues.
Yeah.
Governments that might underregulate actual competition, but heavily overregulate access to the market through licenses, connections, political favors.
So it creates an artificial scarcity almost.
Exactly, an engineered scarcity, which means the people who rise to the top are often brilliant asset traders, as some critics call them. They're experts at navigating these politically created inefficiencies. Access becomes the real currency, maybe more than pure innovation.
And there's often a big gap between the public story and the real story of how they started. Li Keqiang is a classic example, right? Asia's richest man for a long time.
The narrative is powerful. Son of a school teacher, arrived penniless, left school early, worked 16-hour days, pure self-made man myth.
But the reality.
The sources suggest it's more complicated. Yes, he worked incredibly hard, but he did go to school for a bit. And crucially, he started working for a wealthy uncle connected to a big watch company family. That initial foothold, that family support, often gets glossed over in the official story. It's crucial for legitimacy, though.
And once they achieve that dominance, how do they treat other investors? The sources mention issues with minority shareholders.
Oh, consistently. There's a pattern of tycoons trying to take their companies private, buying out the minority shareholders, but at massive discounts to the actual asset value.
Like how big a discount?
The examples are pretty stark. One offer from the Cook family was at a 53% discount. Lee Shockey tried offers around 40% discounts. Basically, deals that are fantastic for the controlling family, but terrible for the small investors. One analyst said these guys make investment bankers look like schoolboys with how aggressive they are.
And this isn't just about individual investors losing out, is it? In some places, it cripples whole economies.
Yeah, in places like Indonesia, the Philippines, the sources talk about systematic looting of banks by connected insiders, often through huge loans to their own companies that never get repaid. It's damaged entire national banking systems.
Okay, back to the West, but shifting to the tech world. Here, genius often seems tied up with, well, extreme personalities, volatility.
Yeah, totally. Tech titans wield market power that rivals the Gilded Age industrialist, but the personalities can be just as intense. Look at Elon Musk.
Right, transformational results, obviously, but the management style.
Notoriously brutal, according to the sources. Co-founders described his habit of lashing out at junior staff, demanding friends be fired. They found it absolutely horrific.
Yet some people working with him felt it was necessary.
That's the paradox. Some colleagues admitted that sometimes his insane deadlines make sense. That relentless drive, that force of personality, allowed SpaceX, for example, to create systems unlike anything that the bloated companies in the aerospace industry could possibly have imagined. But it came at a huge human cost internally.
Then you have Sam Bankman-Fried, FTX. The whole effective altruism angle, but underneath.
Deep contradictions. He and Caroline Ellison, the CEO of Alameda Research, his trading firm, had been romantically involved. They broke up but kept it secret, while still living in the same luxury condo complex with other effective altruists.
So maintaining multiple false fronts?
Yeah, one source called it making a truth of two lies. Pretending the relationship was fine, pretending the company structure was fine, while both were falling apart. And that deception went right to the core finances.
How so? Alameda was exempt from FTX's rules.
Alameda Research had special privileges. They were essentially allowed to borrow huge amounts of money from FTX money that ultimately belonged to FTX's customers. And crucially, the collateral they posted for these massive loans, it was FTT.
FTX's own crypto token, why is that so bad?
Because FTT was an asset they largely controlled themselves. Its value was tied to FTX's success, it was thinly traded, and they could potentially manipulate its price. Using it as collateral meant they were borrowing billions based on an unstable, self-created asset.
So when FTT's price collapsed,
the collateral was worthless. And the billions in loans from customer funds couldn't be repaid. It was structural rot, hidden by complexity and deception.
Let's shift to another giant, Amazon, Jeff Bezos. His focus was legendary efficiency, right? Driven by something called the negative operating cycle.
Exactly. That negative operating cycle was pure financial brilliance applied to retail. Think about it. When you buy something on Amazon, you pay immediately. Amazon gets your cash instantly.
Okay.
But especially in the early days, they didn't have to pay their suppliers, the book distributors or whatever, for maybe 45, 60 days.
So they're holding on to customer money for weeks before they have to pay their own bills.
Precisely. It created this massive, continuous float of interest-free capital. They could fund operations, expansion, undercut competitors on price, all using this internally generated cash flow instead of needing lots of outside investment.
Genius, really.
And that long-term focus meant he wasn't afraid to take big risks outside their main business, like the Kindle. Oh, yeah. Apparently, there was huge pushback inside Amazon against developing the Kindle. Hardware is hard, expensive, risky inventory, lots of vehement objections.
But Bezos pushed it through.
He was not deterred by short-term setbacks. He saw the long-term strategic value and just powered through. It's that same pattern. ignoring conventional wisdom, total focus on the goal.
Sometimes that drive, though, it goes beyond business strategy and becomes personal obsession. Pathological, almost. Howard Hughes seems like the ultimate example.
Hughes is maybe the tragic endpoint of what happens when infinite wealth enables infinite obsession. It started early with making the movie Hell's Angels.
He poured everything into that, right?
Everything. Worked insane hours, 24 or 36 hours straight. Completely consumed. The sources suggest even he was frightened by his own intensity. His wife left him, feeling totally shut out. His wealth meant there were no normal limits, no boundaries on his work obsession.
And later, that turned into extreme paranoia.
Deep paranoia. During the big TWA lawsuit, he's telling his aide to roll up his sleeves, saying something like, "These guys will be prying around like ferrets looking for blackmail material." That fear drove him into reclusion, erratic behavior. The wealth just amplified the underlying issues. It seems like the common thread, whether it's Asian tycoons using political connections, or tech guys using speed, or Hughes using sheer money, it lets them operate on a totally different plane. Financial, social, psychological.
So if wealth gives you that power, what's the ultimate goal? Is it just more wealth, or is it control? Control over politics, over the public story?
Often it seems to be control, translating private wealth into public power. Look at the Koch brothers.
Initially, they weren't that into mainstream politics,
Yeah.
right? More libertarian, philosophical.
Yeah, Charles Koch's views were described as so far right he was off in the ether. More interested in abstract ideas than, say, funding GOP candidates directly.
What changed?
According to the sources, it was feeling targeted by the government, a legal investigation that made them feel brutalized. That experience triggered a strategic shift.
From philosophy to practical politics.
Exactly. They started building serious corporate defense capabilities, pouring money into GOP campaigns, think tanks, lobbying. It wasn't just ideology anymore, it was self-preservation, using political power to protect their business interests from scrutiny and regulation.
In places without strong democratic checks, that grab for control is much more direct, like Putin's rise.
Absolutely. The sources detail lawyerly, almost bureaucratic maneuvers he used. When he returned to St. Petersburg, manipulating the timing of the mayor's race to catch opponents off guard.
Cutting down their time to campaign.
Right. And then, as prime minister under Yeltsin, going to Yeltsin and demanding absolute power to coordinate all the security ministries, police, intelligence, military, power that constitutionally only belonged to the president.
And Yeltsin just gave it to him.
Yeltsin agreed, handed him the keys to the security state. And then you see how that power is used systematically against opponents, like Mikhail Khodorkovsky, head of the Yukos oil company.
They didn't go after him directly at first, did they?
No, that was the strategy. They went after his associates, arrested his head of security on old murder charges, arrested his main business partner, Platon Lebedev, on fraud charges from years earlier. It was this escalating legal pressure designed to isolate Khodorkovsky, demonstrate the state's power, and show the cost of opposition. Very calculated.
So you secure political control, but you also need to control the story, the public perception. That's just as old, right? Back to the Gilded Age again.
William Randolph Hearst basically wrote the playbook for that. He didn't just report news, he plotted it, like a running serial drama on his front pages. Clear villains: McKinley, Hanna and heroes, William Jennings Bryan.
And the goal wasn't accuracy, it was sales and
Yeah.
influence.
Sources suggest his view was that partisan coverage sold more newspapers than dry. Distance, they were here and said this stories. He was building a political opinion machine, first and foremost.
And he controlled it completely.
Utterly. Even when senators investigated him, thinking he wasn't involved day-to-day anymore, they were wrong. The sources say little, if anything, appeared without his approval, especially front pages and editorials. Total micromanagement of his message.
That need to control the narrative continues right into modern media figures, like Oprah Winfrey, one of the most powerful, carefully crafted public images ever.
Absolutely. And part of that crafting involved hiding things, like her reported resentment towards male colleagues early in her career. Jerry Turner, Al Sanders. She apparently only vented to close female friends. When those men died, she was noticeably absent from the public mourning.
And using the medium itself to manage vulnerability.
Definitely. That famous show where she discussed past drug use. She insisted it be taped, not live, so it could be meticulously edited, control the perception, maximize the empathy, minimize any potential damage. Very strategic.
But the most extreme example was the sex abuse scandal at her school in South Africa.
Right. Publicly, she handled it with seeming transparency. But behind the scenes, she imposed unprecedented restrictions on the media covering it.
Like what?
giving instructions that sensitive footage related to the scandal could only be used for a limited time, like just for the rest of that month, and explicitly could not be archived or shown again in perpetuity.
Wow. Can you even do that?
A network executive called it absolutely unheard of.
Yeah.
It just shows that when you have that level of wealth, celebrity, and power, you can essentially dictate terms to the media, overriding normal practices to protect your image, even in a crisis.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. Gilded Age force, modern financial complexity, global reach, tech disruption. What's the big takeaway when you look across all these stories?
Well, the industries change, the tools change, railroads become algorithms. But the core behavior, it seems remarkably consistent.
How so?
You see this extreme, almost obsessive focus in all of them. A willingness to push boundaries, to operate outside the normal rules, whether those rules are legal, ethical, or just social conventions. And there's always this deep entanglement between their private money and public power. They bleed into each other.
So it doesn't matter if it's the 19th century or the 21st. The game is still about control, efficiency, scale, achieved by people willing to go further than anyone else.
It really seems that way. And it brings up a final thought, something kind of provocative. Based on the economics underpinning all this, the economist Thomas Piketty talks about this idea.
Right, R versus G.
Exactly. His argument is that when the rate of return on capital on investments, wealth itself, is consistently higher than the rate of overall economic growth, then inequality naturally tends to increase. The rentiers, the people who own the capital, pull further and further ahead of the managers, people who earn income from labor. Hard dollars is greater than checks.
And we've seen that dynamic play out here, haven't we? Vanderbilt using his massive personal capital, Blackstone using huge leverage, which is just magnified capital power.
Right. So does all this evidence, from Vanderbilt controlling railroads to Blackstone using nearly 10x leverage, does it suggest that fundamentally wealth accumulation always favors capital over labor, no matter the era? The statistics seem to bear it out.
Yeah, that contrast is stark. The top 1% of wealth holders own something like 20% of all the wealth, but the top 1% of earners only get about 6 or 7% of total wages.
It suggests just having capital is structurally more rewarding than earning income through work. And the stories we've looked at show the incredible lengths these titans go to protect and grow that capital and the power that comes with it.
Which, as you said, inevitably shapes politics, media, the whole structure of the market.
So the question for you, the listener, is where do you see that fundamental Joy J dynamic playing out today? And what happens when one person's obsession, turbocharged by all that capital, has the power to shake the whole system?
A question that definitely needs its own deep dive. Thank you for joining us for this exploration into the nature of these colossal fortunes.